The message arrived at Earth's diplomatic center at exactly 3:15 a.m. Earth Standard Time. Red lights flashed across the night shift monitors, and the urgent beeping of priority communications echoed through the usually quiet halls. Ambassador James Miller was sleeping when his comm unit buzzed. He had been Earth's primary representative to the Galactic Council for 3 years, but never had he received a Priority 1 alert in the middle of the night. Rolling out of bed, he pressed his palm against the scanner on his bedside table. "Ambassador Miller responding," he said, his voice still rough from sleep. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the worried face of his assistant. "Sir, we have an emergency summons from the Council. They're demanding Earth's presence within the next 12 hours. Miller sat up straighter. In the 5 years since Earth had joined the galactic community, the Council had never issued an emergency summons. Something was very wrong. "Get me a ship ready," he ordered, already moving to his closet. "And send me all incoming communications from the past 24 hours. I want to know what sparked this." On the short shuttle ride to the spaceport, Miller reviewed the data. Multiple species had filed complaints against Earth in the past day, but the details were oddly vague. Words like aggression and hostile action appeared frequently, but without any specific incidents mentioned. The diplomatic vessel, Earth's Hope, was ready when he arrived. It was Earth's fastest ship, capable of using the Council's approved faster-than-light corridors. As the crew prepared for launch, Miller noticed something strange. Other alien ships at the spaceport were keeping their distance. Usually, there would be the normal bustle of trade and diplomatic vessels. But today, the other ships had created a clear zone around the human section. "They're afraid of us," said Captain Rogers, walking up beside Miller at the observation window. "Got word from my friend in port control. Several ships requested emergency clearance to leave when they heard we were launching." Miller frowned. What could have happened to cause this level of fear? "We've been nothing but peaceful since first contact." The journey to the Council station normally took 6 hours through the FTL corridors. Miller spent that time reviewing Earth's recent activities. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Trade was steady, cultural exchanges were going well, and there hadn't been any significant incidents with other species. When they emerged from the final corridor, the Council station came into view. The massive structure looked like a silver snowflake, its 8 arms stretching out for kilometers. Each arm housed representatives from different sectors of the galaxy, while the central hub contained the great chamber where full Council meetings were held. As they approached their designated dock, Miller noticed more signs of unusual behavior. The normal security scan took 3 times longer than usual. The docking authorities required multiple confirmations of their credentials. Even the automated guidance systems seemed to be keeping them at a greater distance than normal. "Ambassador," the ship's communications officer called out, "we're receiving the official summons details. They want you in the Great Chamber in 1 hour. Sir, they've designated this as a Level 1 hearing." Miller's blood ran cold. Level 1 hearings were reserved for the most serious violations of Council law. Things like unauthorized weapons of mass destruction, genocide, or unprovoked wars of aggression. The last Level 1 hearing had been over 200 years ago. When Miller stepped off the ship, he found none of the usual diplomatic greeters waiting. Instead, a group of Council security officers stood at attention, their ceremonial weapons clearly visible. "Ambassador Miller," the lead officer said stiffly, "we will escort you to the preparation chamber." As they walked through the station's corridors, Miller noticed other diplomats and officials quickly moving out of their way. Some showed fear, others anger, and a few was that pity in their eyes. In the preparation chamber, Miller found his usual Council advisor had been replaced. The new advisor, a member of one of the younger species, couldn't seem to meet his eyes. "The Council will begin shortly," the advisor said quietly. They have evidence, Ambassador. I suggest you consider admitting responsibility. It might go easier for Earth." Miller straightened his diplomatic sash and took a deep breath. I can't admit to something when I don't even know what we're accused of. Earth has nothing to hide. The massive doors to the great chamber began to open, and Miller could see hundreds of representatives from across the galaxy taking their seats. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Something was very wrong, and Earth was somehow at the center of it all. But Miller had not spent 30 years in diplomacy to be rattled by theatrical displays. He squared his shoulders and prepared to face whatever accusations awaited him. Whatever was happening, he would defend Earth with every diplomatic tool at his disposal. The truth would come out. It always did. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council was designed to make anyone feel small. Its ceiling rose hundreds of meters high, decorated with swirling patterns of light that represented the galaxy's major star systems. 217 species had seats in the chamber, arranged in rising circles like an ancient theater. Ambassador Miller walked to the center platform, trying not to show how fast his heart was beating. The platform rose slowly until he was floating at eye level with the Council's inner circle, the 12 oldest species in the galaxy. The Gray Speaker, head of the Council, rose from his seat. His long, silver robes caught the light as he moved. The chamber fell silent. Representatives of the galaxy, the Gray Speaker's voice boomed through the chamber. We are here to address a grave matter. Evidence has been brought forward of an unprovoked attack on peaceful vessels. The huge screens around the chamber lit up with images of destroyed ships. The wreckage floated against the backdrop of space, torn apart by what looked like weapons fire. These were scout ships, the Gray Speaker continued, peaceful explorers from the Outer Rim. They were destroyed 3 days ago at the edge of Earth's solar system. Miller felt his mouth go dry. He had heard nothing about this. Earth's defense forces would have reported any battles near their borders. The human species, the Gray Speaker's voice grew harder, has shown its true nature. They hide behind words of peace while building weapons of war. They speak of friendship while destroying innocent explorers. More images appeared, sensor readings, energy signatures, debris analysis. Miller's mind raced as he tried to process all the information. A representative from one of the warlike species stood up. We should remove them from the Council. They are too dangerous to be trusted with advanced technology. Another voice joined in. Sanctions, full trade isolation. Their ships should be banned from all major trade routes. The chamber erupted in shouts and demands. Miller raised his hand, requesting to speak. The Gray Speaker waited for the noise to die down before acknowledging him. Honorable Speaker, Miller said, keeping his voice steady, Earth has no record of any hostile engagement in our space. We request access to the full sensor data from these incidents. You deny responsibility, the Gray Speaker asked. I deny nothing, Miller replied carefully. I simply state that we need to examine all evidence before reaching conclusions. This is the Council's own standard procedure. A low murmur ran through the chamber. Miller had quoted their laws back to them. A bold move for a representative of such a young species. The Gray Speaker's eyes narrowed. Very well. The evidence will be provided. But we have more to show. New images appeared on the screens. They showed Earth's defense platforms, the automated weapon systems that protected their solar system. The images were taken from unusual angles, as if. Miller's eyes widened slightly as he realized what he was seeing. These images could only have been taken by ships that had entered Earth's space without permission. Ships that had gotten far too close to Earth's defense perimeter. These weapons platforms, the Gray Speaker said, are far more advanced than what Earth claimed to possess when joining the Council. How do you explain this deception? Miller stood straighter. Those platforms were fully declared in our membership documents. Page 247. Section 12 of our application clearly lists all defensive capabilities. We have nothing to hide. Nothing to hide. Another Council member stood. Then explain why these peaceful platforms destroyed our scout ships. Miller's mind caught on the word our. The speaker had said our scout ships, not the scout ships. A small slip, but a revealing one. I would be happy to explain, Miller said calmly, once I've reviewed the sensor data, and I would like to know why these ships entered Earth's defensive perimeter without following standard contact protocols. The chamber grew quiet. Miller had just politely suggested that the peaceful scout ships had been somewhere they shouldn't have been. The gray speaker's face showed no emotion. You will have 2 hours to review the evidence. Then you will return to answer for Earth's actions. This session is paused. As the platform lowered, Miller caught glimpses of different reactions in the chamber. Many showed anger, but some of the younger species representatives looked thoughtful. They too had noticed the slip about our ships. Miller's mind was already racing. 2 hours wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. Something wasn't right about this situation, and he intended to find out what it was. He had a feeling the real story was hidden in those sensor readings. Now he just had to prove it. Miller sat in the small preparation room with his aide Thomas, surrounded by floating holographic displays. Each screen showed different pieces of data from the destroyed ships, and time was running out. Look at this, Thomas said, pointing to one of the readings. These energy signatures don't match any known scout ship designs. Miller moved closer to the display. The destroyed ships had given off energy readings that were far too high for simple exploration vessels. He had seen similar patterns before, but not from scouts. Pull up the standard energy outputs for military ships, Miller ordered, his eyes narrowing. Thomas quickly brought up the comparison data. Sir, Thomas's voice was quiet. These readings are almost identical to warship power cores. Miller nodded slowly. And look at the debris pattern. These ships weren't just destroyed. They exploded from the inside. Our defense platforms don't cause that kind of damage. They dug deeper into the data. Each new piece of information painted a clearer picture, but it wasn't the picture the Council had presented. These ships had been carrying heavy weapons, shield systems far beyond what any scout would need, and most importantly, they had been running with their sensors focused directly on Earth's main defense grid. Time-stamp this, Miller said, pointing to another screen. When exactly did our platforms open fire? Thomas worked quickly. According to this, our platforms fired exactly 2.3 seconds after the ships activated their weapon systems. So they shot first, Miller said quietly. They were testing our response time. A small alert popped up on one of their screens. One of the younger species representatives, from a planet called Blue Haven, had sent them a private message. The message was short but clear. Check the ship's data cores. Some of us have noticed patterns. Miller and Thomas shared a look. If other species were secretly helping them, this conspiracy might be bigger than they thought. They focused on the recovered data cores. Most of the information was heavily encrypted, but Earth's computers had been quietly working on breaking the code. With less than 30 minutes left before they had to return to the Council, the first decoded messages appeared. Thomas's eyes went wide as he read. Sir, these aren't just military ships. They're part of a test fleet. Look at their mission parameters. The decoded text scrolled across their screen. Mission objective: test Earth defense capabilities. Determine response times and weapon effectiveness. Gather tactical data for full invasion fleet. Download everything, Miller ordered. Every decoded message, every power reading, every weapons signature. And get me the exact coordinates where these ships entered our space. As Thomas worked, Miller paced the room. The pieces were falling into place. These weren't peaceful scouts who had been attacked. They were advance units for an invasion force. Someone in the Council had been planning to attack Earth, and now they were trying to use this incident to weaken Earth's position. Sir, Thomas called out, I found something else. These ships have been to other worlds too. New species, just like us. Each time, they either tested defenses or... He paused, looking troubled. Or what? Or they reported that the species was suitable for integration, whatever that means. Miller's jaw tightened. It means we're not the first. They've done this before. Provoke a new species, claim they're dangerous, then use that as an excuse to take control of their world. They spent their final minutes organizing their evidence. Miller knew they would only get one chance to present their case, and it had to be perfect. Thomas, Miller said as they prepared to return to the chamber, send a coded message back to Earth. Tell them to put all defense platforms on high alert. If we're right about this, you think they might actually attack. I think we forced their hand. They expected our defenses to be easy to overwhelm. Now they know we can fight back. They might decide to move before we can expose them. As they walked back toward the great chamber, Miller noticed more of the younger species representatives watching them. Not with fear now, but with hope. Perhaps Earth wasn't the only victim of these tests. Miller straightened his uniform. In his pocket was a data crystal containing all their evidence. Soon, the Council would learn that humans weren't just good at fighting. They were also very, very good at finding the truth. And the truth, Miller knew, was about to change everything. The great chamber was even more crowded than before. Word had spread that the human ambassador was returning with his response, and no one wanted to miss it. Miller stood on the central platform once again, but this time he wasn't nervous. This time, he had the truth. "Honorable Speaker," Miller said, his voice clear and strong. "Earth requests permission to present new evidence." The gray speaker looked down at him. "You have examined the proof of your guilt. Do you come to confess?" "No," Miller replied. "I come to reveal." Before anyone could object, Miller activated the data crystal. The chamber's massive screens came to life, showing the first piece of evidence. "These are the power readings from the destroyed ships," Miller said. "I asked the Council, since when do scout ships carry warship-grade power cores?" A murmur ran through the chamber. Miller didn't wait for a response. He brought up the next screen, showing weapon signatures. "And these are the weapon systems that were charging up when our defense platforms responded. Notice the timestamp. They fired first. We only defended ourselves." "This is manipulation," one of the inner circle members shouted. "The data must be fake." Miller smiled slightly. "The data comes directly from your own ship's black boxes. Would you like me to show how we decoded it?" The gray speaker's face had turned a paler shade of silver. "That information is sealed under Council security protocols." "Yes, it is," Miller agreed. "Which makes it interesting that these scout ships were carrying classified Council military codes. Would anyone care to explain that?" The chamber erupted in confused voices. Miller waited for them to quiet down before continuing. "But the most interesting part isn't the weapons, or the power cores, or even the military codes." He pressed another button, and new text filled the screens. "It's the mission orders themselves." The decoded text was clear for all to see. "Test Earth defense capabilities. Determine response times. Prepare for integration." We weren't the first, were we? Miller's voice carried across the now silent chamber. "How many other young species have you tested this way? How many failed your test and were integrated?" Representatives from the younger species began standing up, their voices joining together in angry questions. They too had faced similar scout ships before joining the Council. The gray speaker raised his hands for silence. "These accusations are dangerous, Ambassador Miller. You risk much by making them." "No," Miller said firmly. "You risked everything by attacking us. Earth has been peaceful. We joined your Council in good faith, but you mistook our peaceful nature for weakness." He brought up one final screen, a star map showing the paths of the destroyed ships. They had visited dozens of worlds, all home to emerging spacefaring races. "This wasn't just about Earth," Miller continued. "This was about control. You test each new species, looking for ones you can dominate. If they fight back too well, you claim they're dangerous and use the Council to restrict them. If they're too weak, you integrate them, which I suspect means something very different from what you told us." More and more representatives were standing now. The younger species had begun moving away from the inner circle members, clustering together in obvious solidarity. "What do you want, Ambassador?" The gray speaker asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. First, a full investigation into these integration programs. Second, an emergency review of all sanctions against younger species. And third, Miller paused, looking around the chamber. Third, I think it's time the Council's leadership reflected all its members, not just the oldest ones. The chamber exploded into chaos. Younger species were cheering, while the older ones were shouting in protest. The gray speaker tried to call for order, but his voice was lost in the noise. In the midst of it all, Miller stood calmly. He caught glimpses of Thomas coordinating with other young species representatives, sharing data, confirming similar experiences. The truth was out now, and there would be no going back. A message flashed on his personal screen, a priority alert from Earth. Their defense systems had just detected multiple large ships entering the outer solar system. The invasion wasn't just a plan anymore. Miller's face hardened. They had exposed the truth, but the real fight was just beginning. As chaos filled the great chamber, Miller watched his personal screen with growing concern. The ships entering Earth's solar system were heavily armed, a full invasion fleet, just as they had feared. But he noticed something else too. Similar fleets were appearing near other younger species worlds. Miller raised his hand, sending a signal that cut through all the chamber's communication systems. His voice boomed over the chaos. Silence. The chamber grew quiet, surprised by the authority in his voice. While we argue here, Miller said, his voice hard as steel, invasion fleets are moving against multiple worlds. Not just Earth, many of the younger species are being targeted. He waved his hand, and the chamber's main display showed real-time feeds from various solar systems. Massive warships were appearing near dozens of worlds. "You're lying," one of the Inner Circle members shouted. "This is another human trick." Miller turned to face him directly. "Really? Then explain why your personal command codes are being broadcast by those ships." The Inner Circle member's face went pale. Miller hadn't just decoded the scout ship's data. He had found the command structure behind them. "You thought we were primitives," Miller continued, pacing the platform. "You thought we would either be easy to conquer or easy to provoke. But humanity has a long history of facing bullies and tyrants. We learned to watch for signs. We learned to prepare." He pressed another button. New data filled the screens. Thousands of decoded messages, fleet movements, secret meetings. "For 5 years, we've been gathering evidence. Every peaceful scout ship you sent, every diplomatic visit that got too close to our defense systems, every coded message you thought we couldn't crack. We saw it all." The younger species representatives were now openly moving to stand with Earth. The old power structure of the Council was literally dividing before everyone's eyes. "But here's what you never understood about humans," Miller said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "We don't just prepare for war. We excel at making allies." Thomas stepped forward, sending new data to everyone's screens. In the past 2 hours, 43 species have confirmed similar experiences with these tests. 37 have already signed mutual defense pacts with Earth and each other. More are joining every minute. The gray speaker rose from his seat, his ancient face showing real fear for the first time. "You would dare to break the Council apart?" "No," Miller replied firmly. "You did that when you decided some species were worth less than others. When you turned the Council from a place of cooperation into a tool for conquest." Suddenly, new alerts flashed across the screens. The invasion fleets were powering up their weapons. "Watch carefully," Miller said calmly. "You're about to learn something about humanity and our new allies." As the invasion fleets moved to attack positions, new ships appeared, hidden defense platforms activated. Shield systems that the older species hadn't known about sprang to life around dozens of worlds. "Humanity's greatest strength isn't our weapons or our defenses," Miller declared. "It's our ability to unite against tyranny. While you were watching our obvious defenses, we were helping our fellow younger species build their own. While you were planning your invasion, we were creating an alliance. The invasion fleets suddenly found themselves outnumbered and surrounded. The younger species had hidden their true strength well, learning from humanity's example. "So here's what happens next," Miller said, facing the inner circle. "Those invasion fleets will stand down. The council will be reformed with equal representation for all species, and there will be a full investigation into every forced integration you've ever conducted." The gray speaker's voice shook with rage. "And if we refuse?" Miller's eyes were cold. "Then you'll learn another human trait. We don't start fights, but we definitely finish them." The chamber erupted again, but this time in cheers from the younger species. The old order was falling, and a new alliance was rising in its place. As Miller watched the invasion fleets begin to retreat, he allowed himself a small smile. They had come to the stars in peace, but they had been ready for war. And in doing so, they had not just saved Earth, they had freed the galaxy. The next day, the Great Chamber looked very different. The rising circles of seats had been rearranged, breaking the old hierarchy. Young and old species now sat mixed together, and the inner circle's elevated platform had been lowered to the same level as everyone else. Miller stood at the center again, but this time he was surrounded by representatives from the newly formed Alliance of Free Species. The investigation teams had worked through the night, and now it was time to share what they had found. "The evidence is clear," Miller began, his voice steady. "Over the past 1,000 years, 67 species were forcibly integrated after failing these tests. Another 42 were placed under sanctions and restrictions after defending themselves too well." The chamber's screen showed planet after planet, species after species that had fallen victim to the inner circle schemes. Some had been completely absorbed into the older empires, their cultures almost erased. Others had been kept weak and dependent through carefully crafted sanctions. "But that's not the worst of it," Miller continued. He nodded to Thomas, who brought up new data. "We found the original council charter, hidden deep in the archives. The council was never meant to be ruled by the oldest species. It was designed to be equal, with all members having the same rights." The gray speaker, now sitting at the regular level with others, stood up. "You're destroying thousands of years of order and tradition." "No," Miller replied calmly. "We're restoring the original order. We're bringing back the true tradition of the council." He turned to address the whole chamber. "The founders of the council wanted a place where all species could grow and learn from each other. They wanted cooperation, not domination." Representatives from other young species began presenting their own evidence. Each had a story of being tested, threatened, or controlled. But now they also had stories of how Earth had secretly helped them prepare, sharing defense technology and warning them about the true nature of the scout ships. "Humanity could have kept this knowledge to themselves," said one representative from a world called New Dawn. "They could have protected only Earth. Instead, they reached out to us, helped us, taught us to defend ourselves." Miller watched as more species stood to share their experiences. The alliance was growing stronger by the hour. Even some of the older species, ones who had disagreed with the inner circle's methods, were asking to join. "The reformed council will need new laws," Miller announced. "Laws that protect the rights of all species. Laws that prevent the strong from bullying the weak. Laws that encourage cooperation instead of competition." Thomas stepped forward with more displays. "We've already begun dismantling the hidden control systems the inner circle used. Their secret fleets are being decommissioned. Their hidden bases are being converted into trading posts and cultural centers." The former members of the inner circle watched in silence as their empire of secrets crumbled. They had ruled through fear and manipulation for so long, they had forgotten that true power comes from trust and cooperation. "As for the attempted invasion," Miller continued, "all ships have returned to their bases. Their crews will be questioned. Those who were just following orders will be allowed to retire or join the new defense fleet. Those who planned the attacks will face justice." A young species representative raised a hand. "What about Earth's defense technology? Will you share it with the Alliance?" Miller smiled. "We'll do better than that. Earth proposes a joint defense initiative. All alliance members will work together to develop and share protection systems. No species should have to face threats alone. The chamber filled with approving murmurs. The fear that had dominated council meetings for centuries was being replaced by hope. "One last thing," Miller said, his voice growing serious. "We found records of other young species, ones just beginning to reach for the stars. The old council had plans to test them too." He paused, looking around the chamber. "I propose we greet them differently. Not with tests and threats, but with open hands and honest hearts." The chamber erupted in applause. Even some of the older species were nodding in approval. Change had come to the galaxy, and there would be no going back. As Miller watched the new council taking shape, he knew that humanity had done more than just defend itself. They had helped create something new, a true alliance of equals, ready to face the future together. 1 month after the Great Revelation, the council station had transformed. The once cold halls now buzzed with activity as species from all corners of the galaxy worked together openly for the first time in centuries. The old barriers, both physical and political, had been torn down. Miller stood at the observation deck, watching ships from dozens of worlds moving freely through space. Among them was a special vessel, the first of the new joint patrol ships, crewed by members from 15 different species. "Ambassador," Thomas called, walking up to join him. "The first graduation ceremony is about to begin." Miller nodded, smiling. In the station's largest hall, the first class of the new Galactic Academy was preparing to graduate. Young diplomats and officers from over 50 species had trained together, learning from each other's strengths and cultures. "Did you ever think we'd see this day?" Thomas asked as they walked to the ceremony. "Honestly, I hoped for it," Miller replied. "But I never expected it to happen so quickly." The changes had swept through the galaxy like a fresh wind. The Alliance of Free Species had grown to include over 300 members, including many of the older species who had chosen to embrace the new way. The former Inner Circle worlds, stripped of their secret powers, were slowly learning to live as equals among equals. The graduation hall was packed. Miller took his place on the stage alongside representatives from other worlds. As he looked out at the graduating class, he saw the future of the galaxy sitting before him. Humans next to former enemies, young species beside old, all wearing the same silver and blue uniforms of the Alliance. The first graduate to receive her certificate was a young officer from one of the previously integrated worlds. Her people had been enslaved for centuries, but now she stood tall, free to pursue her own path. The applause as she accepted her certificate shook the hall. After the ceremony, Miller headed to his next appointment, the opening of the new council archives. The truth of the galaxy's history, long hidden by the Inner Circle, was now available to all. Researchers from every species worked together to understand their shared past and learn from it. "Ambassador Miller," called a voice. It was one of the former Gray Speaker's aides, now working for the new council. "The first contact team is ready for your inspection." This was perhaps the greatest change of all. A new ship, staffed by experts from multiple species, was preparing to make contact with a newly discovered civilization. But this time, there would be no tests, no threats, no secret evaluations. "We're doing it right this time," Miller said as he reviewed the contact protocols. The ship carried teachers, doctors, and scientists, people ready to help rather than judge. They would offer friendship freely, allowing the new species to choose their own path. Later that day, in his office, Miller recorded his final report as Earth's emergency ambassador. He had been appointed to handle a crisis, and that crisis was now over. It was time for him to step aside and let the new generation of diplomats take the lead. "Computer, begin recording," he said. Final report from Ambassador James Miller. 1 month after the reformation of the Galactic Council, peace holds firm across known space. The Alliance of Free Species continues to grow. Former enemies now work together to build a better future. He paused, looking out his window at the busy station. The greatest victory wasn't in defeating the old order, but in creating something new. Where there was fear, we've built trust. Where there was competition, we fostered cooperation. The galaxy is changing, not through force or manipulation, but through the simple power of working together. Miller thought about Earth, about how far they had come from those first days of space travel. Humanity's role in these events will be remembered, not because we were stronger or smarter, but because we chose to reach out instead of stand alone. We proved that the best defense isn't just about weapons and walls. It's about building bridges and making friends. He smiled as he saw a group of young diplomats walking past his office, eagerly discussing plans for new cultural exchange programs. The old council thought they were testing us. In truth, they were testing themselves, and they failed. But from that failure has come a new beginning. A galaxy where all species can grow, learn, and explore together. This is Ambassador Miller, signing off. As he ended the recording, Miller knew that while this chapter was ending, the real story was just beginning. Humanity had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors or victims, but as builders of bridges between worlds. The future was bright, and it belonged to everyone.